In recent years, fast growth has become popularly associated with VC backing, as startups in some sectors, financial technology being a prime example, have become addicted to VC funds. Now, as funding and private company valuations contract, a good number of VC-backed startups are laying off workers and scrambling to conserve cash, while successful penny-pinching bootstrappers are getting some well-deserved respect. Interface.ai is building an AI-powered virtual assistant, and they're selling it to community banks and credit unions across the country, which they then offer to their end consumers. The way they pitch it is sort of as like almost a bank GPT. It's supposed to be kind of an intuitive financial assistant that helps people pick the best financial product. To crack the US market, Interface.ai has zeroed in on a niche sales approach that requires little spending on marketing, one of the areas where consumer-facing fintechs have burned through sacks of VC cash. The strategy? Focus on serving only financial institutions too small to develop their own AI or to demand extensive customization.
Our target customers are all Americans, right? So we've taken a very interesting approach to reach them. There's about 5,000 plus community banks and credit unions in US alone, and they serve 200 million Americans. We've taken a strategy to go through them just like Visa, MasterCard did, right? You know, if you pull up a card from your pocket, you'd see the card from either Visa, MasterCard, but you also see a bank logo, right? Because bank gave that to you. Similar to that, we see a strategy to reach those 200 million Americans served by these community banks and credit unions through them. So tomorrow, if you pull up your bank assistant, it'll say, name of the bank powered by, Interface.ai. So that's 200 million Americans is our target market. It turns out that we were able to do by bootstrapping, right? And honestly, it was not a path we pre-designed to go down that way, right? And we don't have philosophy to just do that or something like that, right? So we started in 2019 and we just took off right after pandemic.
The quintessential examples of a bootstrap business are a dental office or a law office that doesn't really have the potential to attract venture investors. So they're never going to reach that massive scale that's going to deliver like a 10x return. Versus a venture-backed startup, there's a heavy investment up front, so they need outside capital to kind of grow there. What this story is trying to point out is that you can build a business in today's world with today's resources with limited capital that has that potential to reach massive scale. And it might need a venture investment later to kind of grow and scale, but you can build a business like that with sort of limited capital at the top. It's not that bootstrapping is more popular now, but I think now that capital is less available than it was in recent years because interest rates have gone up so much, there's kind of lessons to be learned from bootstrapped founders who didn't have this excess in capital to spend on marketing, to spend on launching a bunch of new products and seeing what stuck, and they really kind of had to focus in on what was working and build from there.
Good founders would not treat the money differently regardless of the source of the money, right? So in fact, if it's someone else's money, you'd feel a lot more stressed out. There's a bigger responsibility in a way. We had a deep conviction. The world needed this and we could really make a difference to the world. We clearly could see having this financial assistant, there would be a pretty significant impact, and we just went at it. I think it gives you quite a degree of freedom to execute relentlessly towards a single vision, right? So there are pros and cons, right? Like, we've struggled quite a bit to get here. It was not an easy journey, right? Like, there are days and, me and Bruce, still people don't lend us money for buying a car. Like, we're bootstrapped, not taking salary and all of that. So it's a fun journey. And beyond all of this, right? Like, I think being a founder or building a company or a startup is the hardest thing to do, right? Like, NVIDIA CEO recently mentioned, if I had to do this again, would you do? They said no, right? Like, if I knew how hard it's going to be, I would have never done this to begin with. A pinch of ignorance helps in a way, not knowing what is to come.
The most obvious downside of bootstrapping is something that Mike Beckham, the CEO of Simple Modern, talked about in the story, which is your personal assets are at stake. So if things start to go wrong, like your house is on the line, which can be extremely stressful, but it's also a reality that I think founders across the country are dealing with. This story is really an opportunity to highlight them compared to venture-backed startups, which have a lot of opportunities for media coverage with every funding raise. Another downside is that bootstrapped founders, they have to focus because they have scarce resources, so they really have to stay in a narrow lane and grow sustainably from there. If you have venture money, you have a lot more room for experimentation, and you can launch a bunch of new products. You can spend a lot more time on research and development. You can try a flashy marketing campaign, and those can all lead to some really interesting innovations, but it does sometimes mean that you can kind of sustain yourself for a long time without necessarily finding product market fit. And then now when the environment changes like it has, you kind of have this tense moment where you're kind of shifting from focusing on growth to focusing on profitability, which is what a lot of investors are telling their portfolio companies now. There's still a really important place for venture capital, and there always will be. An example that I think of is Valen, which is a mortgage servicing platform. They had to take a couple years to build out that platform, and they needed venture money to pay for research and development, to pay for software engineers, to pay for their office space. And the reason that venture investors were willing to give them that money is because they thought the idea had this really massive outsized potential to deliver a return to them. I think what this story is trying to point out is that with today's resources and today's technology, you can build a company with relatively little capital that still has that massive potential. And I think Interface.ai, which is the lead of the story, really kind of brings that point home.
We did that bootstrap, and we also did that as a immigrant founder. That just multiplies the difficulty of it in a many ways, right? There are days I didn't know I would be in this country, right? But you got to keep going. And there are days I had to go back to India, and I was working in the US time just to keep up with the business here, right? So I wish that was easier. But the really good thing is you are building really strong foundations in the company.